So I've got A3 watercolour paper, and I've put it onto my board. I'm just trying to get my camera to get all of it in. It's quite tricky to fit it all in. And we're going to be looking at these really hot coloured sort of sea creatures, and I don't want to do, so we're not trying to do like a portrait. I just want to bring some of the elements that you get in with their kind of surface, and we're going to be working a little bit in ink. So I'm going to start off with, I've got a squirty bottle here. If you haven't got this, is just one you get from the garden centre, you know, the sort of like 99p job, or you can, if you've got cleaning products, if when you finish the bottle, give it a good clean out so it's got no more cleaning products in it, and then you can use that to squirt water, which is quite a nice bit of recycling. So I'm just going to wet my surface down. It's quite useful this if you don't want to have a particular direction in your water. You know, if you're not trying to put a horizon line in or anything particularly geographical, you can just start with this sort of wet surface. And I'm going to use a bit of ink as well as watercolour, and just to get a variety of tones in. So I'm going to start with an orange ink. If you haven't got ink, then watercolour. Make it, sort of mix it up. Try and get quite a. So we want lots of pigment and lots of water, because we want to try and get our colours quite suitably vibrant with this. But I'm just going to put a few drops of ink on my palette. I'm using a very sort of fiery orangey red, and a little bit of water. And you will find with ink that it spreads a lot more, or it has a lot more movement, I hope. I always say these things and then it just looks at me sulkily and decides not to. But I'm going to start with a kind of sweep through that could be something to do with sort of tentacly. So look, it's just going to bring that sort of curve through. And then I want to water it down a bit more. But you can see it has sort of like an afterlife. I sort of felt I put it on and then it starts to spread and things sort of round behind my back. Doing stuff, giving me some shapes to work with sort of later. So I'm going to put this sort of, I think I want to get a bit more water onto my surface. That's it, because I want to get this sort of lovely, I want to get some dribbles happening. That's it, get the surface wet and get some more action happening. So we're getting some sort of, oh lovely, look at this fantastic sort of like sea branches that are starting to empty out. This is the kind of thing I want to get going. So it's just a very simple sweep of paint, and then adding some extra water onto it and trying to get some effects like that to happen. And so you can do it with any kind of ink, really, just any sort of like even the old dip, school pen ink that we were talking about earlier, with the sort of inky fingers kind of ink. Morning, Sally. Oh no, oh dear. If you ever tried, did you email me? Oh good. Okay, I'm sorry. We're sort of. Did you get the pictures through that we're looking at? Fab. Lovely. So we're just sort of, what I've done is just wet my paper down, really, and then I put some, I'm using a drawing ink today, so I put a big sweep of kind of red and orange. If you haven't got drawing ink, mix up a lot of watercolour paint that's going to be quite wet, but with a lot of pigment in, and then I've put a sweep on, and then I sprayed over the top to kind of get some more water onto the surface to see what would happen. I've got A3 on an easel, so it's got some gravity behind it. And I mean sort of like, sounds like I'm saying gravitas, but I mean gravity. Right, so I've got this sort of sweep on through here, and now it's sort of like, it's always this thing of like, oh, that looks nice, I don't know what to do now, because I'm quite like that. I'll just stop there and we'll call that a day, shall we? No, I think we're going to get some blue. It's lovely, let's keep going. No, we're going to get some blue in, so let's get some blue, and I've put a little bit of the kind of red into that as well, so I can just build up some of that purple coming over, but I want to get some stronger blue into that. I'm just wanting to create a surface really that is going to give me something to work with. So that's my sort of purple. Then I'm going to get another echo of blue into this. So I'm going to take some blue on my brush and bring that around, almost like a sort of rainbow stripe, but just to get sort of that colour in. To bring that through, let's see what that's, just sort of adding in some darkness into that, and let's get some more kind of vibrancy. And I love this because you can get a dropper and kind of get some real strong pigment onto the surface. And then if you can sort of get your paint running like that, and then you can almost get in there with your spray, if you've got a spray gun, and just keep that moving and keep that sort of alive, and it just brings that surface Takes loads of water. You can dry it all off in a bit, but just sort of get that pouring down. We're going to be working quite wet today, so I hope you might need some paper towels handy to sort of stem the flow a little bit. I want to get a pinker tone into this at some point. I don't want it to get too on the red spectrum, but I'm going to bring in. Let's bring in some blue into that, and then we want to get some pink going. So I don't have a fantastic pink in my watercolour, so I'm definitely going to be using pink ink on this, which is such a satisfying thing to say, pink ink. So let me find, I want my pink ink, here we go. So let's bring some of this hopefully lovely magenta colour in. So we're going to just keep up building these layers of drips and runs and textures and colours to begin with, and then we look for the detail later. And so I'm now adding in a real magenta. Again, watercolour if you've got it. Lots of water, lots of pigment. I want to make quite a wet pigment that's going to do something, that's going to move over the surface. And I can bring that through up and getting that to move. I just want that central kind of feeling of there being not exactly a tentacle, but like some sort of structure kind of coming by having that central S moving through. Just to bring that in, and then once you've got it on the surface, we can spray some water or we can flick some water and see what happens. We just want to get colours to move and interact and spread out. That's it. So we just see what that's going to do, and just create something that's going to be hopefully really alive and have sort of all this lovely detail that we can move into, and all these little shapes and things we can get into in a bit when the paper's dried off, and work around all these sort of things. There's a lot of I feel there's a lot of circular forms kind of in the images, so I want to, up here I'm going to get a circle kind of going or sort of building, and I want to use a yellow kind of colour coming into here. So I'm going to go back to watercolour, so we're not all just inks. So I'm going to mix up a strong orangey yellow kind of colour. So I'm just mixing it round. That's got too much orange in it, so I need to wash my brush a bit more. And let's get a sort of circular orange, leaving a kind of white shape in the picture or in the background there with that sort of colour. And then I want to just get loads of yellow into that, as much yellow as I can, sort of building up onto that surface, and we'll see what happens when the two sort of meet, just out of curiosity. So I'm going to keep plenty of yellow kind of coming into that. I want to build it up in a lovely sort of sweep, and then I think I want to get a bit of that yellow kind of reflecting into some more of this. So yeah, I'm gonna get all of this yellow. I think I want all this to be kind of quite yellow. So we're just thinking about a starting point, so we don't have to do anything hugely representational, because we're not in that market at the moment. Then I can add some. I want to get some yellow element into the area that I've got going down here, which has sort of become quite tentacly, if that's an adjective. Well, in English you can put any Y on any noun and turn it into an adjective. That's how we work. So we can say it's all a bit tentacly down here. So let's just bring some of those sort of colours through. Almost has that feeling a little bit of like the acrylic kind of pouring that you see, but you know, there's a random quality to it, which is really exciting, because I think it kind of like it has this effect, I think, of taking the decision-making process away from you, so you're not having to worry, you know, you're not having to have a grand plan, and you can you really can just go with what it gives you, and then that's a way of sort of, you know, I think it takes the pressure off sometimes, so you're not sort of like saying, have I achieved? It's like, have I explored? To explore is to achieve with this, and so you're not sort of trying to meet, you know, a sort of terrible art teacher in the back of your head telling you whether it's right or wrong, because, you know, you just have to work, you just have to go with what's happening. Right, so I'm going to put a little bit more water onto this sort of yellow section, see what happens. But we're almost not going to need to do a lot more. Oh, look, isn't that lovely with that yellow that's starting to pour down through that green, through the blue, sorry, then it's creating this sort of green. And this is just with watercolour, so again, just adding this spray to kind of get this watercolour to move down and get it to interact with some of the other colours. Is creating something I think that's really interesting. Almost think that's all I want to do with that. I don't think I want to do a huge amount more paint. I think we're just going to keep it really like this, and then we've got these sort of areas in here, and I can see we're going to get some, we've got all this work to here to sort of bring out, we can get some circular forms and some sort of dark detailing kind of working around. I think I might just take some blue into some of the edges down here, some sort of darkish blue, to kind of get that sense of oceanness coming in behind. So I'm just going to use the brush and sweep in some colour onto the corners of the picture, so they've got some dark or some blue happening. So it's going off into, I don't want to paint over my dribbles, so I'm going to kind of avoid them, but just to sort of get some sort of sea depth into the bottom section. So I'm just quite carefully, well, relatively careful, as careful as I ever am, moving in between there to get some dark sort of shading in, just to bring that along. And I think, do we want this whole to be dark, or do we want it to be light? I'm debating. I'm thinking a blue in here. I think somehow bringing that sort of to punch. Let's go for it. Come, let's do it. Let's go in. Let's get some actual paint on my brush, and it might actually happen. Let's go in and get some more dark tone into, move it all water. I'm going to get some blue watercolour into the centre of that yellow circle, so it becomes like a hole into the ocean rather than a sun. So I'm just mixing up some paint. Looks thoroughly unimpressive right now, but I am going to get some more blue tone into that and darken that down. I'm going to add some pen work into that, and I think get that darker. Let's get that blue, so that's now becoming a blue, so there's an element of structure, a little bit of structure, or something that can pull these sort of areas through. Where's my blue ink? Has disappeared. They are very lively, my ink pots, always rushing off and hiding around the corners. Where have you gone, blue ink? It's hiding from me. I'll have to use a different blue, and it'll have to work. So, you know, it's amazing how, I swear we have a poltergeist that lives here. It's not a very evil poltergeist, but it just likes to play tricks on me quite a lot and hide things. And I mean, it could also be my 5-year-old. That could also count, as I think that counts. So I'm just going to keep that. I don't want this one to run so much, so I can just make sure I'm not getting too much of a drip in there, but I don't mind there being this nice spread around the edges. But if you sort of start painting and you see a drip, you can kind of like catch it with your brush and kind of put it upright, and that will start to stop it from being an actual full-on drip. And then just for consistency, I want to bring that same colour kind of coming through onto the edges, and to create our sort of, so that by bringing the colour into different areas, your eye will always start to kind of link up those same colours. It will connect those sort of areas, which is a way of bringing, you know, thinking about bringing yourself through the composition and sort of round. Right, so I'm going to stop painting pretty much there, and then we're going to dry it off so that we can start with the pen work. We might try turning it upside down and seeing how that changes things, if it does change things. Or we might stick to it being this way up. But so I'm going to get the old hairdryer out and dry that off. And yeah, and then we're going to take that off, and then we're going to see where that's given us. This area here on your camera looks very white, but if I just sort of bring it down, there is actually quite a lot of colours in there. I think it's always so hard to get the camera can never see as well as my eyes see or what thing, but hopefully you can see it's got this fantastic sort of area through here which we can do quite a lot with. Right, so I'm going to mute, I'm going to get my hairdryer out, so I shall be back to you in a couple of minutes. Right, so mine is dry, and it also has the effect of, with using the heat from the hairdryer, it has the effect of shrinking back the paper, because when it's wet it sort of expands and it does all the bobbles, and so it's a bit smoother now than when it was wet, because it's in big bobbles. As I said, if I'm working, you know, without time pressure of being in a class, I'd probably leave it to dry overnight and give it a good iron before I started, or press it between some books once it's dry with lots of weight on it to kind of get it to smooth out. But I'm hoping that you've got something that, if not looking like this, has got a similar kind of feel, because I think what's lovely is all these kind of like tendrils kind of coming down through here that we can kind of explore with sort of shapes and a sort of like overall profile that is not, you know, not exactly sea creature, but it has that kind of feeling to it. So again, we don't have a plan at this point. We're just going to see what the sort of images take, where the images sort of take us and what they sort of want the pen to do. So I'm going to start in with, I've got some coloured like felt tip kind of pens. I've been doing a lot recently with some really cheap and cheerful gel pens, which have been fantastic fun, that add like a metallic colour to things. And they were sort of, they were like £5 for about 30, and they were great. They've been really great. So definitely keep looking out for like super duper bargains like that. Now there is this sort of like, with the octopus shape as well, you have these sort of like sucker like kind of fields of sort of circles. So where I've got these sort of drip lines going here, I'm going to try and get some sort of circular shapes into those, between those lines, but I'm going to let the lines kind of push the circle and decide what kind of shape it is. So it's got to fit into, so if you've got some dribbles running down, then you can bring these sort of shapes into, and you're also kind of drawing the eye, or drawing, like literally drawing round areas on the canvas. So if you start seeing some shapes inside that to explore later, that's brilliant, because that's what we want to kind of try and do. But I'm sort of, they could be sort of suckers, they could be kind of bubble shapes. By using the sort of coloured ink, so it's not quite as strong as the black ink, it kind of has more harmony with its background, and we can play with that later. We can decide if we want to keep that, and some of them you might want to just do like a double line over really, and just sort of see how the sort of shapes take you. But I'm not going to do every single one, I don't think, but I just want to get the feeling of this trail kind of coming through the shapes. So you can see there's a nice sort of dip in there, and that definitely is calling out for a circle to kind of just fit into it. So it's sort of drawing our eye through. So we're getting this sort of structure running, sort of flow structure running through it against, in opposition to this. We might put some more circles on this one yet. I don't know yet. We're going to see. So I've got down to here. So I've got a big area of this kind of drip here. So I want to keep that on top at the moment. So I'm going to bring another circle tucking into this side here where I've got that area. So really, I just want you to sort of see where you feel that these sort of quite simple circle shapes can sort of come in. They're all going to be, everyone's going to get a different effect because everyone's got different backgrounds to work on. But just I've got this sort of like slightly diagonal kind of feel going through. It's going slightly the same way as this sort of sweep here, so that gives us a motion, a movement that's happening in the same sort of direction. And come down. I think I want to do a third one there. You know, it's just sort of considering. And then I can put some smaller ones maybe in between, sort of getting some texture into some of those little gaps if I'm not sure. I think that just starts to add some sort of surface and build up that feeling of the sort of travelling through. And looking at this now, I've got an area here, so I think I might want to put a couple more into here, but just so that I've got almost like picking out that kind of tentacle shape. And then up here in this sort of section, I'm hoping you've got some, at least something similar, where you've got some rivulets running through with the different sort of colours. I'm going to start outlining some of these because I'm now sort of half thinking about the shapes on the seahorse, you know, with the sort of sprays that it has. Just finding some of those lines that I can draw around and picking out some of the colours. And there's something, for some reason, I just think it's so satisfying seeing these images picked out with a coloured outline that kind of blends into them slightly. I don't know why, it just seems deeply satisfying, but you know, I just find it very satisfying. If it's just me, then that's fine. But and then up to that line, I can add in some little smaller circles, just because you get the texture of the paper coming through. And oh, my camera's moved at a funny angle. I'm sorry. Let me just move that back again. You get the texture of the paper kind of coming through, and it gives you a sort of bobbliness which you can build up on. So I'm just trying to get in a bit closer. It's quite tricky because I can't, with a smaller piece of paper, I can kind of move it around. But this is, what I might do is just tilt this on the side so that I can show you this section a bit better, so it's a bit closer to the camera. So we're looking sort of in here, that's better, and you can maybe see that a bit better with some extra light on it, not that much light. Yeah, I think we're just about getting a bit closer now. You can see a little bit more of what I'm doing. Right, there we go. So because this sort of, the ink and the paint has kind of moved over this lovely bobbly watercolour surface, then it gives me almost like little lines to follow, so I can pick out this sort of smaller detail. And by using the coloured pen, it's kind of blending more into the background. So it's just giving me somewhere to follow down. And I'm following kind of the rivulet down into this sort of area. And you can see how it's almost got like a sort of bobbled surface. So I'm just drawing attention to that to see where it's kind of grown along. And that sort of gives us this sort of line here. So I'm going to just come back up and do these ones up here. You can do it stage by stage. You only need to think about sort of one move ahead, really. You can say, right, well, I'm not sure where the whole painting's going, but I can see this bit. This bit's going to work for me. So I can take this line along down this edge. I know I can do that bit. So let's do that bit and then see if that's given me any sort of further on to work on. Okay, well, look, I've got sort of the line, I've got this blue area here and kind of blue area here. So let's do some circles in on this side at least. Or maybe with this one, and I'm going to put some circles here, and then I'm going to do some line work on this one. So I'm going to put these circles that just sort of occurred to me I want to do. So again, vary the size of the circles. See if you can find a little interesting paint detail that you can kind of draw around, so that I can see there's almost like a line already there for me, so I can pick that up and draw it round. So it's just keeping on looking at that paint surface and just being open to what it's done and what it's created for you to work on sort of further. And we can just keep building up these layers and working on the images that we've given. And then this section here that I just suddenly felt like I want to do something different, I'm going to take, if you sort of do these lines that kind of run through a piece like this, it, to me, it has that feeling of like the veining on a fin, on a fish, the way they have that very translucent kind of quality, but they have this structure of fine kind of veins. So I'm just going to draw some lines into this bit and getting them to have this sort of direction, so they're all moving in a sort of pattern, gives them a sort of purpose. It gives them a kind of a direction and energy. It's taking them all like that, so they're all kind of coming through up here. So, and then I've got, look at this little sort of like wiggle of paint work in here, so let's just take that up. So just keep on seeing what the wiggles have given you, and the runs and the dribbles and the surface, and then sort of, if you can see something, you can draw a line round it, and it's that's that's taking you forward. And as you draw a line around an area of the paint, what you're seeing is kind of just drawing attention to where this colour lies and what you've got going on here. So in this little tiny section here, I've got this sort of red edge, and it's always, then it's sort of fading into the blue in the middle. So by sort of drawing around that, I'm just taking your eye to it and just saying, look at this, you know. It's sort of that feeling of, you know, when you just want to go, look at this, look what I found here. And then where I've got this sort of red sweep, the kind of initial brush stroke that I put through, I want to give that a bit more kind of force through the painting. So I'm going to change to a red pen. Just a red felt tip will be fine. Anything that's got a tip that you can handle that's not too sort of chunky. I've got quite a chunky marker here, but it's got a double end. It's got a thinner end and a fatter end. So it's surprising how delicate you can be with really quite a substantial nib. You don't have to always have, you know, fine lines. Again, I'm going to flip this round so that I can get a better angle of it on the camera. So now it's disappeared completely on my screen, but I'm coming sort of down here now. So I'm sorry it's at a slight angle, but I think that will just about show you where we're going. So I've got this red line here, so I'm going to bring my red marker. It's a chunkier line, but it's, you know, that's what I'm saying, any felt tip. You don't have to buy really expensive designer sets. You know, you're welcome to, but, you know, you can just get really quite cheap and cheerful pens from the kids section and work with them. And I know sort of like people worry about, are they going to be light fast? And, you know, if I have my work up on the wall, and I always think, well, you know, if you ever try to clear up after a bunch of children, you know how hard it is to get rid of all the pens that they put everywhere. So I think that's quite a good pedigree to say that they'll be quite, they'll last, you know. I think every house that's had children in it has got sort of scribbles somewhere. Or it kind of should have, really. And then I'm going to continue this red line. So I want to bring this red sort of shape through. So it's stronger, but it's just hinting at being here. So that central kind of sweep has a bit more drama. And that red, look against that pink outline. That's very, very vibrant and quite delicious. So I'm going to bring, again, here I've got another red edge. So let's bring this through into the pink. Like moving that all the way through, just because we want to keep that sort of flow and that kind of feeling of coming through. And then I've got layers in this red, so I can, and they're all kind of travelling in the same direction because our brush stroke was doing that thing. So we can bring, oh, I've gone off the page, sorry. It's really, I'm keeping half an eye on my picture and then half an eye on the screen to make sure it's actually coming out, so I miss it there. But yeah, I'm just going to bring that really strong kind of colour through. And maybe on here, let's get some red circles going in, thinking of our kind of octopus shape. So just some echoing circles building up. And then where you've got like a sort of little dent like that, you might want to push a circle into it and bring those sort of round. Okay, so we're sort of getting that kind of feel, and I'm just going to keep looking. I've got these nice golden sections here, haven't we? Look, with this sort of yellow, where we've got this yellow to kind of come in between there. So can I get an orange? Have I got an orange I can find? Just to see what we can do with here. I've got this sort of let's see if I can outline round through here. I've got, this is a fantastic neon orange, which is very sort of gaudy and real sort of kids pencil box stuff. But again, it really brings some sort of light and fire into what you're doing. And why not? Why not have glitter pens and metallics? This sort of thing, these colours I think work so well together. And I hope it's just about coming out. It's so much brighter for me than it is for you on the screen. If I come in a bit closer, you might just sort of see it. But just want to get some yellow and some more colour in it, see how it works going across these sort of areas. Get some more of those lines in, building that across this shape. And, you know, discover what's there, but also don't be frightened to kind of work on top of it, because it then becomes this beautiful background for all these sort of colours. And let's get some real clashing going, you know, let's put all those colours together that we're not supposed to put together, like orange and pink and red and orange and purple and all those sort of tones, because the octopus is and the seahorse are doing it, so you know, so can we. So I've just added some orange detailing in. I will scan this and send to scan because it's going to be easier to see, but I'm just filling in between those sort of shapes. And then on these sort of uprights coming through here, let's go back to my pinkish kind of pen and outline again to get a bit more strength into that kind of dribble coming down. And just finding those sort of scales, and just keep thinking, keep looking back at the source pictures, because although it's not you know, not trying to draw a painting of a seahorse or create a painting of a seahorse. See if you can look back at the creatures and see the kind of textures and the shapes that they've got going on. And you can see on that seahorse they have this sort of, he's got like sort of white kind of highlight spot marks coming into this sort of surface. So this would be a great, if you've got white pens or something that's got a gel pen that's got a paler sort of surface, then we can bring in some highlighting later to kind of mimic that feel. So we can hopefully keep finding these texture banks and just bringing in these sort of circles and finding the swirls and the links between the areas and thinking, right, well, how am I going to get, what's going to happen when I get up here? What's this bit's going to do? I'm going to follow this pink line kind of coming through here. And are they sort of stalagmites in caves? And on this red, where I've got this very strong red, now I've got those red circles that I've drawn on top. Then I can go round and go next to my red line with this purple line and just outline that too, and then that becomes another layer of colour. It's just making that extra strong and giving it loads of vibrance. And you might want to start with like just getting the centre of the piece really in focus and kind of seeing where you want it to go. I think I want to put another circle in there. I can see a place to put one just sort of coming in there. So let's get lots of detail into this centre section, then we can sort of look at moving out. So then here, look, I've got some nice frilly kind of edges there, and so I can do some line work almost to make drip shapes that come into those edges. So imagine sort of long teardrop shapes, sort of like almost like flower petals, but just where I've got that sort of frill shape, they've sort of come into there. And that repeated shape again has a feeling a little bit like shells and the sort of building up of shells, so that's working quite well, I think, in what we're doing. And where you get little white areas, you can draw around those, and that suddenly gives them a lot more presence. They become brighter looking because you've sort of just seen where they come. And it's always that thing, if you can't make something brighter because it's already white paper, it can't go any brighter, you can make it stand out by making what's around it that little bit darker. So it kind of really emphasises the white, and you can get really small and just pick out little tiny moments where the paper might still be showing through, and that's quite an effective way just to give that some real sort of brightness and energy. And let's have a think about this sort of, you know, inside the sort of circles that we've drawn in now. We can, once you've got all the circles in, I'm not saying we finished that bit yet, we may just want to do more, but I'm just sort of trying to think about all the sort of different possibilities that we can build in here. So inside the octopus swirls, then maybe there's like a secondary circle we can pick out, and a little bit like we did with the sea urchins, using some curved lines coming around that to sort of give that a bit of depth and layering into that. And yeah, I can just sort of see a slight more, where I've got this slight more shadowed or sort of blue purple coming into that, I can use that as a sort of shadow by making sure there's more lines kind of drawn around there and creating extra shapes inside these shapes. And I'm all the time just looking and seeing closer and closer and looking again, looking again, looking again. So I do like one level and then go back and look again and see what else I can find, because now in this kind of stringy bit through here I'm seeing there's bits where the red is kind of spread across and given almost like a vein-like structure. So I'm just drawing that in again a bit more strongly. So, and then where I've got all these circles, in between the circles gives me a chance to get some sort of shading in, or something that's a bit darker. So I might go for like a darker blue kind of pen, or even towards a black pen. But now I can go back in and kind of go round some of these shapes that I've identified, these circle shapes, and just the little tiny triangles of negative space that have appeared kind of in and amongst the circles where they don't fit. You start drawing that in, and that becomes like a background, and it starts pushing the little circles forwards again, making them look brighter and giving it this sense of texture. So just just where the circles are kind of left a tiny, almost just dotting in little dark moments. But can you see how that's suddenly given that like a background? It's suddenly pushed all these little bits forward. So let's continue that sort of around here and all around, just in between where those circles come, and it makes those circles now stand out and become brighter. And you don't have to stick to it being blue all the way through. If you go onto the pinker areas, you might decide that you want to change to a reddy, more red-like colour, but just find a similar sort of thing just around the little areas of negative space, and then you are adding this background, and you're sort of gradually taking control of what you want these shapes to do. I'm kind of pushing them around just to bring all these lovely clashing sort of hot colours in, but that sort of started to give that like a texture, hopefully it started to make that pop out a bit. So I'm liking the way that that's working. So to get more of that in, we need to do some more circle textures onto here to kind of bring them up. And oh, just one of those moments where you go to push a lid on the pen and instead miss and stab the pen into your hand. It doesn't hurt very much. Like, luckily didn't do it too hard, but I've now got a big red spot on my hand. But there we go. Where I've drawn on myself. Right, so let's get back to a purpley pen. Because I'm going to come into this area here now. So now I'm seeing some more circles with this purple that I can bring in. Well, look, there's a nice one there. So just constantly go back and look at what you've got happening and see if you can. And they don't have to be round. I mean, you know, I know all circles are round. They're sort of circulish shapes. You know, they could be oval. They could be more like bean shapes, depending on what your painter's done. So that, you know, they don't have to, I'm not suggesting you have perfect circles. And I think the sort of blobby quality of them will give them a sort of more natural kind of, or more sort of sea creature feel. And then here I'm just sort of echoing some of that larger circle, just to kind of get that repeated feel in. So it has that sort of slightly different. So like with this one here, I can see that there's a lovely edge of paint there. So if I make that into a wobble, and again I can bring some fanning out sort of areas round from there and just bring them in a different sort. So I've got like layers of sort of shape appearing there. And let's have a look back up at some of these. There's some lovely sort of red tones inside this one. So I can just, I've got this wobbly shape that's now kind of appeared. And I'm going to follow that through, wobbling and wiggling through that circle. So that I've got more structure and more things to work around. And then I'm going to come into that yellow space. I'm sort of going over the orange lines that I did originally, but I quite like that now. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to bring some, so I've got some more texture and structure into that yellow section. And I've got this great big pink area here, so I think this needs to be addressed. I think on here I'm doing some pink lines, but it's not really standing out enough, so I think I'm going to switch to a blue again. Blue is quite a good colour to think of as your kind of shade colour, because it's cool, so it always has a kind of more of a shading feel than a hot colour does. So I'm following that red line up round there, and I want to get, it's quite a heavy pen, so it's quite dramatic at this point. And then I'm going to get some lighter, sort of finer blue pens, but they're just quite good for, we're just seeing some texture. And bring that round and up. And that's just given that like a whole lot more depth and a whole lot more to go on to. So I'm going to bring I can just see like a sort of line through there, and I'm just going to really pick that up and just draw that in and see where that's going. Right, so that's quite some heavy blue, so now I'm going to come in with a slightly finer blue pen. Again, you can use felt tips, you can use you can get drawing pens, but you can, as I say, felt tips, gel pens, any sort of pens that just give you a range of colours. They don't have to be a massive investment. But now I can break this. I can see like there's a wiggle of pink in there, so I can break that up and come around that sort of shape, and just thinking about segmenting out this shape so it's got some more structure to it. And I'm just seeing there's a very dark bit of paint there, so let's draw around that, and a swirl of paint, so that gives me an idea of swirling those round. And then again I can go around into those little corners between those sort of segments and just get them into blue, and that again starts to give them a sort of surface and a texture that wasn't there before, but just by it helps to give them like a background, which gives them shadow, and shadow gives them form. Just looking all the time and seeing that I've got this sort of like zigzag of paint sort of coming through here, so let's turn that into a kind of swirl. Just to sort of see what's going, small holes in there, draw around them, let them become a feature, let them become a thing. And just bring this around. So I'm going to do a little bit more here, and then I'm going to step back and have a look and see kind of where we're going and where I want to move on to next. But long lines seem to be happening here along this sort of section, and again where this sort of pours down, bring those sort of lines through. That line that I've sort of picked out, and let's bring that, and I'm going to carry that down into this sort of border line between this blue and pinky red area, until that sort of becomes a moment like that there. And in between that red, if I get some blue in as well, that's going to again darken that down and become more like the background and give me some edges. Right, so I'm just going to take a step back, as it were, from here. So we're starting to get this central area of this really sort of intense detail happening. There's a nice sort of cloud bank of stuff happening here. So I think I want to look at that bit next, and I think we'll have a look at what's happening with that great big sort of blue circle. Again, I'm going to turn my board round and hope that will give me this sort of section up here. Look, this sort of looks like, it's almost like something like cliff faces going on with it. I don't know, it sort of has that slight feel with sort of like, so sort of like it has sort of veining going down. So obviously it's sideways at the moment, but I'm going to move it round eventually. So I'm going to pick that up with a kind of pink pen. So you can see there's like a sort of quite strong edge through here. So let's, I think I'm just trying to draw that so I'm not masking completely what I'm doing. But so I'm looking for this flow to kind of, so I'm picking up on the dark spots of paint and just moving backwards and forwards as the paint moves. And I think where I get these sort of clusters of paint mark, I can come back and draw my circles and things into those. But at the moment I'm just sort of bringing this top edge along and moving backwards and forwards in these sort of almost like ridges, I suppose, and then I think with some of these lines, I've got these sort of nice lines coming down. They can sort of almost be like craggy cliff faces to bring them down, and I can join them into that sort of more ordered section that I drew there. So I'm just thinking craggy cliffs and sort of surfaces, and then up into that space and down. And then I can come back along, like maybe even on the underneath of these ones, and sort of just follow that. I've got this sort of isolated like islands of colour, but if I do a line round them, then it starts to link them visually with the line that I've done before, so it's connecting them into that sort of section. It's got a slightly sort of Giant's Causeway feel about it, as if these are all sort of stones that are kind of broken up, and it continues up into this section here, which you can just see at the top there. They've got this sort of nice broken up bit, so we're going to continue that round so that my blue paint is now kind of going behind that pink. So by giving that pink, by outlining it, it gives it that power, it pushes it forward a bit, and it allows us to kind of work round it, and gets the blue becomes like the background, then it becomes sort of scenery. And then these sort of like, you've got this blue coming up in here, so I can, you know, continue this up and get this to sort of become background as well. So these are becoming really quite prominent, like sort of coral reefs or fissures in rock, coming round. And I can just outline, and I think what is lovely about working like this is that you can't ever repeat things exactly, that every single thing you do is going to be a new exploration, a new kind of finding out, but you can remember things that worked well last time, things that, you know, you were happy with. So you can think, oh, well, I've got that sort of shape again, so remember what I did that last time, let's try that again, let's see how that works on here. And that's sort of then slowly building up a way you can, a sort of a bank of resources you can draw on to kind of respond to what's going on the page, so you don't feel like you have no options. You think, well, you know, we're just starting off with drawing round things, and then we can always do circles into things, and then we can find these sort of cracks and crevices and start to do more with them, and it gives you a way of starting in. And it's always that thing of, it's the doing something, getting something started, that is probably the hardest bit. I mean, it's a different kind of hard getting them finished, but I mean, making a start is always the most daunting bit, and that's why I like working like this with so many things, is because you can, the paint kind of makes the start for you, it forces you to jump in. So you know, you don't have to sort of, and if it doesn't work out perfectly, go, well, the paint wasn't in the right mood today, and the paint was a bit grumpy. So it's not you that hasn't worked out, it's the paint that hasn't quite given you what you wanted, and that's fine. And that's why it's so lovely to really think about colours, think about working with colour as your main kind of starting point, because taking your inspiration from, like we did today, from the amazing colours and those sea creatures, but if you're working with colours that you really enjoy and that you want to look at, it's going to be much easier to look at them. You know, if you're not in the mood to look at brown, it's very, you know, it can be very disheartening having to draw something that's very sort of brown and grey and dull looking. I mean, you might be really into those colours, because sometimes, you know, all those lovely subtle shades of grey and brown can be quite absorbing and delicious. So I'm not in any way criticising those colours, but to start with, if you choose ones, and if you might be naturally drawn to kind of greens and blues. So if you work with those colours, then you're looking at something that your mind and your eye finds attractive. It's always a good place to start. You might be much more of a hot colour person, you know, or you might sort of get into some really unusual colour combinations like chocolate brown and mint, which can be really fantastic. And just want to sort of do something that just allows you to explore those colours and push them around on the paper, and then sort of go deeper and deeper into them. So I think we're getting this sort of, if I come back up right again, oh, come on, there we go, sorry, it's just my little, there we go, right, it's quite a fat board, so I'm just going to, and it's moved a bit, let me just tilt it back. Right, okay, so we've now got this kind of cliff face at the top here, sort of moving down, and it's moving into this sort of almost like becoming quite sort of jewel-like sort of section in here. We've got this very dark space up at the top, which I think I want to think about. I think I'd like to get some edge into that next. So I know it's at a slight angle, but I think you can see, let me get my edge so that I can get that nice and dark bring it round some of these lovely sprays and cracks and crevices that it's formed to see what that does, to see how we get this, because it's going to be like the real dark centre or the darkest part of the painting. So I want to bring the darkness, which sounds very dramatic, but just sort of, so in between those cliff rivulet face sort of areas that I've got here, I can come in between with my pen and draw those in. And so wherever you've got your darkest bit, let's get that in and get it really kind of established. And it starts to give this an edge. This starts to look much more like a sort of structure that you could get into. Let's flip around this way so I can get it on camera a bit better, hopefully. Maybe I can't, but maybe that's just sort of then come down. You can see sort of this shape that's here. I've got tape here where it's obviously attached into the board, so I'm going to actually have a line here. So let's get that line in, or an edge there anyway, so we can sort of see the shape a bit better and bring that through. And I've got this very soft bit here, so I'm almost not going to touch that because I don't want to completely get rid of that. So I'm imagining this is kind of a hole, almost kind of pouring something out. And then I've got all this sort of running through here. And I'm just going to see what happens if I bring some of these lines up over this space into this dark area. And I might be colouring this dark area in even more strongly, I don't know yet. And just bringing some of these lines rolling up into this space. And again, by adding the lines, and the more closely you draw your lines together, the stronger the colour of your pen will become, because you're sort of filling in background. So it's worth remembering, because you think, well, whether I want to get that a bit darker, I'm going to draw my lines closer together. And then if I want to add a bit more tone, then I just separate my lines out. And then they're not so dark and they don't have quite the impact. But I'm keeping this direction going, so eventually it'll have this slightly pouring quality, as if something's pouring out from the space. So I can just, it's also giving me a sort of a direction. So I've sort of I've got that line, so I've just carried that shape on around. I want to keep working because I don't want to look like a sort of beard. It's got to be all part of this shape. So it's kind of, I'm imagining it's kind of coming out of this kind of hole, and they're just sort of slightly being pulled down sort of by gravity. And then as it comes to this side, it's going to slightly soften. And then I think I want to get this area in much darker. And you could go back in with a stronger paint and just keep trying to darken that down. I'm lucky in that I've got a marker pen here, so it's got a fat end in the same colour. You can totally colour it in with stripes of fine line. It's just going to take longer. But just for speed, I can put this all in much darker. So hopefully it'll be quite impactful. And then it'll start to give all the sort of blue tones in this piece the kind of sense of being in the background and being a sort of hole through into another space. And it'll add power to them. So again, I'm just going to try and get this filled in as quickly as possible, so it becomes really dark. And I'm hoping it'd be quite sort of, yeah, it's sort of hopefully going to look like quite a sort of strong part of the composition. And hopefully in the contrast, this yellow is going to be really bright and sort of vibrant. But yeah, that's sort of given that sort of like a sort of almost black hole kind of feel. And then I can continue drawing some of these lines down, and they're coming out of here, some sort of movement, some sort of thing pouring. Let's bring that little area of blue, let's make that darker. And then I'm wondering if I can get it to kind of join up into this blue section here, so we've got again more sort of depth. And by making this hole in the blue look sort of darker, this pink area starts to stand out a bit more. And so yeah, let's follow that blue edge look, and this becomes quite strong. that pink in comparison becomes really strong. It becomes something that's standing out, you know, against this sort of whole. And that red there goes from being something we're looking through to see, and it becomes something sticking out into that sort of blue space. So let's see how that changes things just by sort of getting this darker blue in on this side again. So I can go into my marker pen and really link this area with the area at the top. I'm going to just draw this in, then we'll flip it round and see how that's helped the if it's sort of got something together with a composition, that it's helped the composition to kind of link through. I always find with these, you know, you sort of do like 10 minutes of painting and like 2 hours of pen work. It's a big sort of, but the paint has such impact because of the colour that it brings. Let's come round. You know, you couldn't do it without the paint, but it's the pen work that really starts to create this into a kind of a composition and gives it texture and gives it interest. Not that the paint's not interesting, but, and I'm just going to, where there's got this slight light area here of blue still, I'm going to go back to doing lines up here to kind of reach up to the lines that are coming down from this shape here. And again, it's sort of like hopefully connecting these two areas so that when we turn it upright, you can see that your brain should kind of link these two spaces and see there's a connection between them. Right, so let's flip it round again. Yeah, so hopefully what we're seeing is we've got this sort of dark area here, and this is starting to stand out as being, again, like a sort of another tentacle almost shape coming round here. I can see straight away I want to do this similar kind of thing to this edge here to kind of get this to really move out and come forwards out of the picture. So I can just take, and I've got a lovely edge here where it's really sort of bled in, so I can just take that colour and work along that edge that I've been given. And look how that's starting to make this almost like a rainbow bridge, isn't it? Sort of coming down like the bridge into Asgard, coming down through here. And I'm just deciding to take that edge down into there to leave this white bit to work on. So that's sort of really pushed this section, let it come forward, and is receding this section here. And it's given it, you know, a kind of, it's a totally abstract form. There isn't anything that we're really getting hold of, and yet it's given it depth, and it's making it look like something quite that's got depth, that's got things moving backwards and forwards, it's got areas you could put your hands into and things that you could discover, you know. So with that sort of dark blue there, so looking at the rest of it now, there's some more blue here, so I can get that in. So what am I going to do here? Am I going to do more blue work coming through here? I don't know yet, but I don't know whether to get some hints of this blue, maybe just along in that edge. Let's just try a little bit. I've got this lovely, very strong yellow, so I don't want to go over it, I don't want to cover it up, but maybe just that white paper that is along that edge, I can go up to that yellow, and let's see what happens if we do this with this. Just follow that round, and then following the yellow shape that I've got in there, a contrast to that red, and move it round and really help that red shape stand out. And I'm going to come up to that sort of this sort of purple string, and then just that yellow edge there, and then I'm going to colour all of this in blue, this sort of background blue. Yeah, and hopefully it's starting to, it's certainly making this red edge really strong, and this sort of red tentacle shape just sort of coming down and round. And where I've got this sort of white bits, again, if I come into this little yellow, so imagine there's like a little hole here that's white paper, so I can draw around that and bring that through, and that's starting to sort of create these sort of, and I can come back and work more on these yellow bits and give them a lot more texture to kind of, so that they've got some sort of substance as well. But I'm hoping this is starting to, again, sort of create depth and movement in this sort of whole sort of feel. So if we come back again and have a look, now we've got this sort of dark areas in, and they're pulling around. I'm not sure what to do here. This corner here, that's definitely got to be blue. So again, you may not be able to work out what you're going to do in 5 stages time, but just keep thinking, what do I know I definitely want to do now? I definitely want to get this corner in kind of dark here. There's a lovely sort of almost like little sea anemone there of sort of pink coming into that dark area. So I'm going to let him kind of move. I'm going to keep him. I don't want him to disappear, exist, and then I'm going to come down here and following that edge, come right close in, get rid of all the white just in there, and then I've got a very thin line of sort of pink coming across that blue, so I'm actually going to keep that, and sort of draw that in, and bring this. There we go. So then I can then fill in this corner in very dark as well, in this sort of background blue colour. So marker pens, felt pens, come back with more paint, acrylic paint, anything that's going to be sort of more opaque and kind of knock that colour back. Lots and lots of time. You could even fill it, if you were had the time, you could fill it with tons and tons and tons of tiny little doodles to kind of really give it, because again, the more pen you put on, the darker the overall effect is going to be. Right, so that's again starting to make this edge stand out in strong comparison. This is becoming sort of dark, pushing away. Right, so we've not got a lot longer on our session, but one thing I want to show you before we stop is using some white on some of these areas to give them some highlights. So this is when you can bring in your white pens. I need to get a new one, I've just realised, because the one I thought was, pulled it close to me and discovered that the lid has been left off overnight, which again might be the 5-year-old poltergeist. He does have a habit of going through all my stuff. So I'm just unwrapping a new one. These are these sort of acrylic paint pens. They're designed for, it says on it, marks on anything water-based. So it's sunproof, windproof, waterproof apparently. It's a sort of thing that people that paint stones, do that stone painting, use. And you have to kind of slightly pump and shake them to get the paint to come down. And it has a fibre tip. But I find them really useful because they will kind of draw, as they say, on most things. So you can use them to then start adding an extra layer by being able to go back in and pick up some sort of almost like highlights on some of these areas. So where you've got like these structures here with the little circles, if you start then doing a little circle of light on top, can you see how hopefully that's starting to come in a bit closer, and you can hopefully see that's starting to add again another way of increasing the three-dimensional feel of that sort of texture. If you look on this sort of red section here where we've got a stronger background, you can see I can just use that to pick up, like adding a highlight and to drawing some sort of extra detail on it. It just gives it an extra dimension, which I think is really useful to play with, or really fun to play with. And these acrylic pens do come in a range of colours. You can usually get good basics, and certainly black, white, gold, silver, and then some sort of primary colours. So again, and they do, although they sink into the paper a bit, that you can keep drawing and keep building them up. And they have the control of a pen, but they have a sort of surface that's a bit more like a paint. So they're really useful if you're doing acrylic paintings anyway, or any kind of more naturalistic painting. If you want to get some kind of white detail back in, or you've gone too dark in an area, or you want to get some fine line detail, I often use them when I'm doing all sorts of paintings, and because they're a great sort of shortcut, for bringing in highlights and different surfaces into what you're doing. Yes. Yes, I certainly will. I certainly will. I don't know if I managed to do it for last week's. I can't remember why now. It's only on the side, so I'll try. I thought I had sent last week's one around as well, but I will definitely do this one too, because it's so much easier to see it on a scan, because also it's not sort of moving and the coloured quality is better. So I appreciate that. But yeah, do see if you can find, if you look up, these pens really are like sort of, you know, £5 for 6. You know, they're lovely and cheap, and they work so well on so many surfaces. And there's no reason why you can't decorate some stones as well. You know, why not? They're quite popular. Has anyone ever... Oh, they're great, aren't they? They're so much fun. Have you done that thing where you take them out on walks and then leave the stones and find stones? Like, yeah, that's so much fun. I used to love doing that. Yes, that's right. I know, it's such fun, isn't it? The kids love it. And I know my little boy, we found one summer, had a smiley face painted on it, and we had to keep going back every day on our walk. We had to go back and, you know, and see that he was all right, you know, and he'd move him like a few inches and put him somewhere else, you know. But it's so much fun, and it's just a really lovely way of, you know, and interacting with, you know, and I think you could do some fantastic artwork on them, you know, and then people are really glad to find them, you know. But they're just such useful pens to sort of bring in, and even with like your gel pens and things. And you remember those, you used to get those gold pens. I'm sure I've got one just to hand. I was just going to do a tiny bit of gold on with that sort of that like real paint pens that, you know, that you used to get at school. And you pump them up, don't you, and sort of get the paint and it go everywhere generally. But oh, where have you gone? Here you are. But again, that's a really good way of getting metallic surface into what you're doing. So, you know, you can then come in and add some hints of gold, and, you know, this one's, I think, might be running out, of course, just when I want it to not. Again, it's a really hard one to get across on the screen, the gold pen, because it doesn't translate. But when you actually see it in the flesh, it's fantastic. And I've got this is just, again, one of my cheap and cheerful gel pens that I absolutely love at the moment. And this has a gold glitter in it, so it just will catch the light beautifully, and it adds a sort of richness. And what's wrong with a bit of bling? That's what I say. We all like a bit of bling. So you can just building up, just again, such simple lines, not complicated shapes, not really, you know, intense spirals, but just this combination of lines and seeing what's going on, and then going with that, you know, letting your painting guide you all the time, and then seeing how you can get some areas to pop forward and some areas to recede back by just the different sort of ways that you're approaching them. And I think, you know, why not get a giant piece of paper, you know, like an A1 size, if you can find such a thing, or an A2, and then, you know, get everyone to pour kind of inks and paints on it and make a fantastic background and leave it to dry in the sun, and then give yourself like a huge giant colour wheel to work on, and just to sort of explore all this tiny detail. And at the end of the day, you're going to have something absolutely fantastic. And it's a great way of doing like small individual cards for people, because it said you can get quite a big piece of paper, do loads of, you know, go really mad and splash all the paint around, and then let it dry, and then break it up into small, like little squares, like little tiny samples, and then you've got little individual tiny ones to work on. And when each one's done, you can make each one a unique little piece and then mount it on a card back, and it's a tiny little individual gift for people, you know. It's just so much. You can collage with it afterwards, you know, you can use it to cover books and things. And sometimes I do that, and it's sort of like, you know, if you break an image up, you cut it up, tear it up, put it back together, it gives you a different range of shapes and surfaces that you weren't expecting beforehand. And then you can kind of draw, and the drawing on top of that then kind of unites them into one kind of thing. So yes, it's just endlessly fascinating. And there's so many of these print on demand places now where you can get prints made, and you can get teacups and t-shirts and things that actually they give you a load of scope for, you know, if you get one that you really like and this sort of abstract, you know, you can go and get them done as sort of fabric print, or, you know, I mean, this would, if you imagine this printed over a silk scarf, wouldn't that be beautiful? You know, and because it does have that sort of silk, and there's loads of places that will do silk printing. There's places like Spoonflower and Fabric Monkey, and they will do different fabrics, and you could, you know, repeat this as a pattern over a piece of fabric, and then go on to make things out of it, or say make a scarf or a t-shirt or something. you know, I'm quite a big fan of sort of taking these, because once you've got your own image to work on, then, you know, you can take it wherever you want to. I have done some of these as very fancy looking teacups, and they looked absolutely amazing actually. Just like a close-up section, but then done on a sort of ceramic surface was beautiful. So there we go. So obviously I've got plenty more to do here. I can keep on going with building up these sort of layers. I want to try and get this, again, this feeling of these sort of quite, you know, like these are sort of structures, this sort of quite structural feel of these pieces here. So they are like the sort of tentacles of the octopus kind of coming round in two sort of areas here. And then I'm really liking this sort of dark space up here. I just need to think what I'm going to do here a bit more, but I think rhythm-wise I want to get this sweep kind of coming through here, and then this sort of area here where the most intensive detail is, so that it's sort of like corolled inside the sort of the arms of the sort of design. But that's sort of where I think we're going to have to call it a day for now. But I hope you've enjoyed that starting point, and I think, you know, you can start with anything, and I think just using those colours as a starting point and then being able to find the surfaces that work with them is just really exciting.